Hi, my name is John Gray, Director of Further Education at Emsi. Sorry I can't be with you today, but I'm going to hopefully give you some really useful information about using labour market intelligence to support curriculum planning. Before we get into some data, I thought it'd be useful just to tell you a little bit about Emsi. Emsi's mission is better insights, better decisions, and we're a company who specialise in labour market information. Based in the States, but also having a headquarters in Basingstoke. Currently work with well over 100 customers, quite a lot of which are in the FE sector, so colleges, awarding bodies and so on. Also work with economic development, that's local enterprise partnerships, local authorities, and more now in the talent space with some large staffing companies. So just to tell you a little bit about Emsi data, we take data from quite a range of sources. You'll see some there, maybe some of the terms that you're familiar with. So ONS, NOMIS, BRES, Working Futures data. So we pull all those different data sources together into easy to use tools. And as well as aggregating that information together, our economists also build out models which show projections into the future. I'll talk a little bit about that as we look at some of the data. So just a little bit explaining about LMI. So a lot of the data that we use is structured data. This is information that's gathered from government, from statistical surveys and so on. And we use that and we base it around industry classifications and occupation classifications. So you may have heard the term SIC and SOC before, and I'll just explain that in a little bit more detail as we move on. We also more and more now use big data, which is really large scale data captured at the transactional stage. So this is things like our job posting analytics, which again we'll talk through a little bit further in the presentation. So just to pick up on the point I just made about standard industry classification, because this is the information that we'll look at within some of the data in the tool. So standard industry classification, or SIC, it tends to be at 4-digit level. So if we see a 1-digit code, then that will be, for example, construction, which is at quite a high level. And we drill down right down to a 4-digit code, which is construction of bridges and tunnels. So you can see there that we move right through the spectrum and from quite a macro level down to quite a granular level. Looking at that as an example even further, so standard occupation classifications that we call SOC. Again, this works at a 4-digit coding structure. So 1 digit would be skilled trades, which is quite a broad overview. But then down at a 4-digit level would be bricklayers and masons. And the reason why this is important, just to explain, is that often you will see at LEP level or at local authority level that they will talk about things at a 1-digit level. So they will say, for example, construction skills will grow by 5% in a broad region in the next 5 years. And whilst that's interesting, it's also probably too broad to do anything about and to make any decisions based on. Whereas if we can get right down at a 4-digit level, then the information is much more actionable. Similarly, we can go from national level data through government office region, unitary authority, right down to local authority. So coupled with the last 2 points, we can look at what's really driving an economy, the different types of jobs and industries right down in your local area. So just as an illustration to show you how that would play out in real data. So these are relatively small numbers and hence why the percentages are so high. But just to show you what I mean by the last point. So if we looked at this occupation in England, call and contact centre occupations, between 2009 and 2014 showed a 14% growth rate. If we drilled that down to the East Midlands, it was actually a minus 11%. So most people would have probably stopped at that level and said, actually, yeah, we don't want to look at that in too much more detail. But when you actually drive right down into Derby, it's actually a significant increase. So it just shows you there the importance of looking at the data at different levels. So why use LMI? I just wanted to run through some useful information before we start looking at some labour market information for your area. So some key themes. Ofsted, clearly at the moment, lots of talk around intent and impact, and I'll talk about that again in a bit more detail on the next slide. Student outcomes, so around progression and attraction. Business community, so often businesses will have much more assurance. If we are offering a relevant curriculum, clearly that will do a lot for our reputation as well. And as generally as FE colleges, we will share a mission of something around social and economic impact, working with our community to demonstrate individual impact as well for different students at different levels. So there's a number of reasons why LMI is a really good sounding block for a lot of that work. So just to touch on the Ofsted point I just mentioned a few moments ago, there are quite a few relevant pieces of information in the new Ofsted handbook, but here are just a few as a sample. I'm not going to read them out, but I'm sure you'll be able to see there. Just picked out a few key words. So helping students to prepare for the next stage, so particularly focusing around the knowledge, skills and behaviours that they will need for the future. A curriculum that offers learners the knowledge and skills that reflect the needs of the local and regional context. And similar, the last point, curriculum intent takes into account the needs of learners, employers, and the local, regional, and national economy. So what we suggest is using labour market information as a good starting place for that. Clearly, we wouldn't say just to use labour market information, but equally, you can use it as a good way to benchmark, a good place to start and formulate some questions, which you can then dig into deeper by talking to employers or with the local enterprise partnership. And so on. So that the LMI is in our tool is a really good way to start. So some key objectives and reasons to use LMI, to understand the importance of the local labour market when planning curriculum. We can review current curriculum course offer, see if there's new opportunities which can be identified for further new content. We can adapt current course content. I'll show you an example of that in a little while, just how something as small as a slight change in curriculum could make a real impact into the local economy. We could scale back provision, which has got poor labour market alignment. So that's been done more and more now in colleges where they just can't carry the same volume of courses now. So really making sure that their portfolio is quite tightly aligned. We can identify new course areas to meet high employment demand. And we can also look at courses which are currently being delivered and to what volume. So is there a greater need for an additional volume of a similar course? So we can start to see this particularly where there is a disparity in supply and demand from the courses, from the number of completers that a college are putting out into the market compared to the local job openings. And we can start to see that within the data as well. So just some points there to consider why we'd use LMI. And what I wanted to just do now is just talk to you a little bit about the different approaches to embedding LMI into a planning process. So since January, I've visited about 50 colleges and training providers across the UK. And these are just some of the key findings in terms of what works for embedding LMI into a curriculum planning process. So quite a few colleges front load LMI, so they will produce a range of reports, gather a range of data, and they will consider this in almost a pre-meeting before the actual formal curriculum planning session. Typically, this is led by someone from marketing or curriculum planning, and they will consider the LMI and curriculum alignment before they get to the first planning meeting, which tends to be focused more around numbers and finance and resourcing. So that's just one model. The second model is where the LMI is considered in the first planning meeting. So the preparation work would have done before, clearly, but then it's actually considered at the first meeting, which from experience tends to be either with the executive team or with at least probably somebody at deputy principal level. And then other colleges, just working through a different example, would have an agenda where they consider LMI at every single planning meeting. Now, clearly not all colleges have 3 planning meetings, but just as an example, from experience, they tend to have between 2 and 3. So what I'm not saying there is that any one of those processes is right, but clearly there are some things which are of importance. So I think fundamentally is agreeing what the college strategy is for the use of labour market data. So how will we prioritise resources based on that priority? So, for example, in my last role at Sheffield College, working in the FE sector, we clearly aligned the the college's strategy around priority sectors and then started to allocate capital expenditure, capital bids and so on based on those priority areas. So that's not a decision that every college would make, but it's a good example of how the data can drive some decision making. Clearly, ownership of producing the data is important. So who will produce the reports, what kind of information will be collected and analysed, and how will we ensure consistency across different curriculum teams. There's also then, as I just mentioned on the previous slides, the ownership of the process, which for me is one of the most important things. So where will it sit within the curriculum planning process? What data will be integrated? And then the next section, so who will own the challenge of that data through the process? So often in curriculum planning meetings, we talk a lot about the numbers, resourcing, the financial value that curriculum will generate, funding values and so on. And sometimes labour market information and the alignment to local and regional context can be lost. So I think having a person who really owns that and challenges it within those meetings is really important. The best colleges really have LMI running as a golden thread through their process. But however it's integrated, I think being properly embedded and owned is fundamental to its success. So some things to think about before we start looking at the data, and hopefully some tips as you start to look at data for your own curriculum planning in your own organisation. So first of all, I always start off with having a look at what is happening nationally. So this could just be trends within certain industries or or broader economic policy. So as a good example of this, recently in Bridgend, the Ford motor plant announced a closure. So whilst that might be a long way away from where you are right now, it often sets a signal for what may happen in other parts of the country, because some of those things are geared around economic policy. So it's worth having a look what's happening around there. When you start looking at your local area, then I always start off quite broad. And the reason why we do that is just to see a broader view of what's happening and see if we can see any opportunities. Always say look at industries and occupations. So colleges tend to look at occupation data because it's more closely aligned to actual courses or jobs. But it's important to look at both, because you can often pick out different opportunities by looking at that information from a different angle. Review how your curriculum meets the needs of the economy. So we can start to look at supply and demand. How many qualified people are you putting out into the marketplace compared to how many job openings there are on an annual basis? And I think I mentioned this earlier on, and I'll definitely show you an example of this in the data, but changes to curriculum don't have to be big. Sometimes just the smallest change could really align something to the local labour market need. And so I'll certainly show you an example of that when we look at the data. And something that I'm particularly passionate about is information, advice and guidance. So in my opinion, we must start to tell students about the skills that they're going to need within the local and regional economy. It's great to talk about job opportunities. It's great that we align courses to those opportunities, but we need to start telling students, young people, ideally probably from primary school age. I'm sure some of you guys might be doing that work. At that age, start to tell them now about what the jobs in the future might look like and what kind of skills they will need to be successful in the marketplace. So before we move into more granular data, these are just a couple of slides from our national conference recently. And again, this is just a good way for me to show you how to think about the national context first. So this is looking at manufacturing, employment and output. The line in the middle shows the base year of 1980. And we can see that between 1980 and 2010, manufacturing output increased significantly, so by about 25%, and manufacturing employment decreased by around 60%. So as a nation, we're producing a lot more and employing a lot less people. So whilst this might be national data, it's useful context when you start to look at your planning activity. On the flip side of that, the jobs we can really see getting traction and growing are business services, creative, digital, e-commerce and professional services, which is probably no surprise, but it's useful to see that in data format, particularly given that the slide we've just looked at, that engineering is starting to decline across the nation. Another interesting piece of information there that we're starting to do lots of modelling now to look at occupations which are at risk. So by that I mean at risk of automation. These are often quite routine or low skill jobs. So sales assistant, storage, admin, customer service, and so on. And what's important to note when we start to really dig into the data is just how many of these jobs, occupations actually make up a large proportion of your economy, because these are things which we need to keep an eye on for the future. But what we'll do now is we'll move into our Analyst tool, and I will show you some data, and then we can give that more context in terms of your curriculum planning cycle. My details are on the screen there, so if you do have any questions about the data or want any further information, then please just drop me a line and I will be able to come back to you on that. So we're now in the Analyst tool, and we're going to look at some data for Staffordshire and Stoke, and probably a little bit more of a broader region than that as well. So this is, as I say, our Analyst tool. You guys have access to this. So what I'm just going to do this morning is show you some overview information, but what you can really do is get logged into the tool and really get into the detail and start to get a really good understanding of what's happening in there. So first off, I'm going to do an economy overview report, and we're just going to take a broad look of what's happening in your area. So initially I was going to run this for Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire, but then I thought that actually it's maybe worth just looking at a bit broader region than that. I note that Stoke's location within Staffordshire is quite up at the top. So what I thought that we'd do is draw out probably a 50-mile radius from Stoke, and then we can take a look, almost a 360-degree look at what's happening within the broader economy. So I'll just run that now. We can then see that Stoke's there in the middle, but we then pick up all those different locations. So that is taking quite a broad helicopter view. But equally, when we start to think about travel to work and patterns that people will, particularly adults and apprenticeships, may engage with to come to the college, it's probably more appropriate. But as I said, you have access to the tool, so you can actually get in there and decide on your own location to run. So we just wait for this report to run. As we've said, it is quite a broad area. So just to pick out some of the interesting information from this. So the economy overview we're looking at, so that quite broad area, population of over 13 million people. And that grew over the last 5 years and expected to grow again over the next 5 years. Total regional employment, so jobs grew again over the last 5 years, and there's going to be further growth over the next 5 years, but that's not quite as sharp, and we'll look at that a little bit further down. Average wages at 25k is below the national average of 29k. So just to point out on this takeaways section, the top 3 industries. So I always point this out in colleges because it's often surprising. So in 2018, the top 3 industries that was specified, so this is industries by the number of jobs employed in those industries, were hospital activities, primary education, and temporary employment agencies. So probably not too many surprises for me there, but it'd be interesting to ask yourselves, are there any surprises on there from your perspective? Often what happens when we look at this data is there is a bit of a surprise, because what we're used to hearing is the rhetoric and the commentary from people like the Local Enterprise Partnership, and we talk about an aspiration of what we want the economy to be, but this is based on government data, and this is saying that in 2018 these were the industries with the most employed people there. So that's certainly worth considering. So just moving down, I'm not going to talk through all this data, but I'm just going to share some of the key points with you. So we're just going to skip through past the demographic data. And now we get into some bit more of an interactive table there. So we can see population data. This has got the population trend on out to 2023. So we can see that there is strong projected growth in that population. So there are going to be more people within that broader economy. We can also see in terms of jobs that There's an increase in job projection. So again, out to 2023. What is worthy of note here is that, by the time we get to this point in 21 and 23, that looks like it's starting to plateau. So it will be interesting to see what happens next, whether, out to 2025 and 27, which we can do in other parts of the tool, if that actually just starts to really flatline. In terms of population characteristics, we are looking at quite a broad area, so that this doesn't surprise me too much. In terms of millennials, we can see that 2.44 million millennials, so that's people aged between 20 and 34, and that is higher concentration than the national average. Retiring soon is slightly less concentration than the national average, and just to point out that is for people in the 55 and older age bracket. And racial diversity is pretty much there compared to national average. I'm not going to talk through this detail in this table. This looks at some of the industry characteristics made up in the area, but I'm going to touch base on those a little bit lower down in the report in a more interactive way. So this is now we're looking at the largest industries. So some of this is what was mirrored earlier on in the narrative at the top of the report. So this is largest industries by job. The little grey bars on the chart denote the national average. So we can see here, right at the top of the chart, largest industry by job is wholesale and retail trade, specifically repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles. And that has more people in that industry than compared to the national average within the area that we selected. Second on there, human health and social work activities, manufacturing and admin and support services, and then education. Just a quick note on reports like this, looking at such a broad area, you tend to have education up there, you tend to have human health and social work activities. Often you get hospital activities on there as well, just because especially the makeup of the United Kingdom, we have some big hospitals, education system within the cities that we're looking at. So you tend to find them up there. But that's where you need to understand really that broader economy and then look at a much more local and regional economy so that we get an understanding of what's going on in your particular patch. So next to look at growth. So this is the top growing industries. We can see here admin and support services are top growing, and accommodation and food service activities, and then professional, scientific and technical activities. So looking around the middle here, we've got manufacturing and construction, which are both strong, and information and communication. So again, you'll know the area better than I will, so be good to know, does this reflect what you see on the ground? So this is based on government data, and then our economists build out some projections over the top of that. Point to note on here, top growing industries are they're quite low skill level industries. So admin, support service activities, accommodation and food service. We'll look at this a little bit lower down in terms of occupations, but it'd be interesting to see the occupations that are growing as well. And I can then talk to you about risk of automation. So we've covered jobs, we've covered growth, and then we're just going to look at location quotient. So again, we're looking at industries, we're looking at location quotient, or LQ for industries. Location quotient is a way of showing the concentration of something. So we can see here the grey line is 1. So down at the bottom there, you see that marker on the chart. So the UK average is always 1. So anything with a LQ of over 1 shows that there is a higher concentration of that industry in your particular region. So the area that we selected right at the outset of this report. So we can see that manufacturing, transport and storage, water supply all have a higher concentration than the national average. So they suggest that they are something that's quite specialist to the region that we've selected. So again, be interested to hear whether you see that in your understanding of the area. Just going to now move down to occupations. So this is a similar type of report, but looking at occupations rather than industries. This is at quite a high level of SOC code. So if you remember from the PowerPoint slides, I talked about SIC and SOC. This is just an overview report, so it's looking at quite a headline level just to give you an idea, but then we can dig into far greater detail. So looking at the largest occupations, largest at the minute are professional, followed by elementary, and then associate, professional and technical. again, we've got the grey bars to denote the national average. So whilst professional is growing, professional is the largest, it's not quite as high as the national average. So looking at growth, what we've got here is elementary as the highest growth occupations, so with the highest projection, followed by professional, and then associate, professional and technical. So I mentioned a little higher up when we're looking at industries. So the top industries were quite low level in terms of occupations, or the types of occupations that would be employed in those industries. This kind of backs that up, that we're saying that the top growth jobs are elementary. So elementary are one of the lowest level of jobs, tend to be entry level jobs. And we've also got some associate professional in here as well, and some admin and secretarial. So that tends to echo what the industry report said. Now, the reason why I draw your attention to that is that we know from research that we're conducting at the minute, and this data will be in our tools pretty soon, that there a number of jobs are at high risk of automation, and it tends to be those at the highest risk are in the elementary and skilled trade professions. So the thing to note in here is when we're looking at some of those lower level, entry level jobs, so things around food and retail, if they are appearing in the top performing areas in the location that you're looking at, we need to start thinking that through, because whilst we're not saying that the jobs will disappear or they'll change significantly in the next 1 or 2 years, what we are saying is they are at high risk of automation. So it's worth now talking to employers, understanding more what's happening in your region and how those jobs may be automated, because the skills the students will need to perform those jobs will then be very different. And that's the whole point in highlighting that. Again, we can look at LQ and wages and job postings, but we're going to look at job postings in more detail in a few moments. So top occupations by location quotient. So again, this is looking at the concentration of an occupation in the particular area we selected. So we can see that the highest LQ there with a score of 1.19 is process, plant and machine operatives. So there are more of those occupations in this area than in other parts of the UK, which again probably correlates well with the manufacturing link with the industry above. So in-demand skills, this is a new section we've added into this economy overview report. Again, gives you a helicopter view of the skills that's being required by employers. So this comes from our job posting analytics. So we scrape thousands of different websites and job boards to get a picture of the skills that are being requested by employers in their job adverts. And I'm going to show this in more detail in a second. But just to give you the flavour, so for this region that we selected, the top skills that are being asked for by employers: management, communication, sales, recruitment, training, finance, customer service, engineering, admin and driving. So this is really, really insightful information. Thinking about this, forget about qualifications, forget about industries. These are the skills that employers are asking for in their job adverts. So just to kind of, give a thought on this and something to consider, if your college were training people and they were coming out with 7 or 8 of these skills that they were really strong at, they'd be, in my opinion, they'd be really employable within the region. May not be the exact occupation that they want, but they would have a lot of underpinning skills that would make them employable. Slightly different way of looking at this data with a nice chart. This shows the skills change over time. So we can see over the past 4 quarters, going back to June 18, we can see the top in-demand skills again through job posting analytics. So management has been up there right up at the top all along. We can, if we just hover over this, we can see that in August 2019, there were over 103,000 job postings, which that was mentioned 103,000 times. So really, really prominent skill. We can also see there how things change over time. So if we just select communication, we can see that that's taken a bit of a path, gone from second down into third and back up to second, but still a really important skill within the economy, as is sales and as is recruitment. So that's been on the increase a little as well in recent time. So a good way to show how the skills position is changing, and in other parts of the tool we can start to look at how this has changed in over longer periods of time as well. not just in the past 4 quarters. So that's just a really broad overview of the, just to skip back up to that, the area that we selected, so Stoke smack in the middle of that, and it was a 50-mile radius. We could look at Stoke just on its own, and I would encourage you to do that and get a better understanding of what's happening in a more local region. Just to echo, the reason why we do this is you often see you'll miss opportunities or risks by looking at just one particular area. So I always encourage you to start broad and then work your way in to a much smaller area. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just jump to a different part of the report and different part of the tool, and we're going to look at something a little more specific around occupations. What I'm going to do is just show you the highest ranked occupations. So let's just change the region this time. We'll look at a 4-digit level, so that's really, really specific. And let's just look at Staffordshire and Stoke. So this is a much smaller area that we're now focusing on. So we're looking at the highest ranked occupations in the 2 areas that we selected. So I'm just going to change the time frame to project out to 2027. And we can see that the largest occupations, just try and get the chart and some of the data in the screen there. So largest occupations are sales and retail assistants, elementary storage occupations, and care workers and home carers. Again, just thinking about my point around automation before, those are certainly some of the highest risk occupations for automation. And we can see there that there's still going to be lots of people employed in those occupations in 2027. So if you just see where my cursor's hovering over there, those are still employing significant amounts of people. The job growth, the change is quite small percentage-wise, but the numbers of people employed are still significant. Other occupations we've got on there are nurses, kitchen and catering assistants, and so on, and bookkeeping right down at the bottom. So again, be interesting to think through, does that reflect the area as you think it seems, or would you have put some of the more technical professions, occupations in there, maybe some more engineering, manufacturing? There's not a lot in there. So this is where it's really important to use the data to get a benchmark of what is actually happening compared with what you think is maybe happening on the ground. Just to skip through that next chart, just looks at the same occupations data, but this time we're ranking it by the median hourly wage. So as you'd expect, things like chief executives, aircraft pilots, medical practitioners, much smaller numbers of jobs there, but clearly they have a much higher hourly wage. Just moving down, we can then see the fastest growing occupations. Again, fastest growing occupations there, we've got elementary storage occupations, kitchen and catering assistants, and care workers. So that correlates with the other reports that we've been looking at. Waiters and waitresses I've not noticed on there before, but that will link back into the food industries that we looked at in terms of the industry data. So again, interesting information. This is purely looking at occupations, not looking at anything to do with industries. And we can see there the most competitive occupations. And this is largely to explain this chart and this data quickly. This is where the actual changes in the number of jobs was much greater than our economists projected in terms of our projection tools. So it shows that there is something happening much more than the what's happening as a national average. There's a real influx there of elementary storage occupations, kitchen and catering assistants. So looking at this without knowing the area too well, I would think that there's maybe been a growth in the number of warehousing facilities within that area, which has increased that number of storage occupation roles. Kitchen and catering assistants are probably an increase in restaurants or fast food outlets, which again has grown that number of occupations. But again, to reiterate that point, use this data to really understand and match that against what you know is happening in the local economy, and get a good feel for that. So just to move into another area of the report. So what we've done, just to reflect back quickly, we've looked at a really broad overview of what's happening in Stoke and the surrounding area. So we get a good feel for what's growing and what's maybe not growing as well as what we expected. We've looked at the highest ranked occupations within the area. We could also look at the lowest ranked if we wanted to do that as well. And I always suggest that you do that and look at both. What I'm going to do now, though, is just show you some of the job posting data. So we're just going to look at this for, let's just look at this for Stoke. So again, just showing you that kind of approach to starting really broad and working your way down narrow. And I do this for all elements of the data and get a really robust understanding. So we're just going to look at Stoke on this occasion. So what we're now showing is an overview of the job posting data. So there have been 31,000 unique jobs posted online between August 2018 and August 2019, and they're unique to Stoke. So we are looking at now quite a small area. And the median posting duration says that jobs are online on average 25 days within this region. So whilst we can't say for sure that the job has been filled, there's a high probability of that, but clearly some jobs will have been removed from someone's website because it's not been filled, and then it will go back on again. So just a little caveat there on the data, but the important thing is to look at the general principles that the data tells us and think about how you can use this data to inform planning. So we then show you the top 5 most recent job postings. So these were the last 5 advertised that our data picked up. So we've got a range of things in there, from customer service in the middle, project management, and so on. We then look at the unique monthly postings over time. So really insightful to see whether there's been particular spikes at certain points in the year, certain points in the past. We can see there that there's a general growth trajectory, albeit with significant spikes and troughs. But that's really useful to start and think about, especially when we get into looking at the data at a more occupation level, to inform things like developing programs for the unemployed. Are there certain peaks and troughs where there's a big boom in the jobs market, and we could maybe backfill that with some pre-employment work? So that's where that kind of data is really useful. Who's hiring? So the top companies who are posting these jobs. Not surprisingly, when we're looking at something at such a high regional level, you get a lot of recruitment agencies in there, NHS jobs as well. NHS will be a significant employer around the area. So you tend to find that really useful data to look at, how we, as a college, are you engaging with these employers? More difficult to say on recruitment agencies, but when we look at a more specific example in a second, you get a better feel for that. And then we can also see whether these actual employers, their median posting duration. So, for example, if we look at Best Connection Group, their 175 jobs which they've posted in the last 12 months are online for around 33 days. Whereas if we look at Academics Limited, they've had 162 jobs and they're only live for 9 days. So there's clearly something different in terms of their how they're advertising or their uptake for those vacancies. We can then see the top cities posting those jobs. As you would expect, look at an area with, around a major town, cities. We often see that the highest number of jobs posted have been in that specific area, but then you get this long tail of other locations. So I'm just going to skip past the next part, the next couple of parts, and then take you down to the in-demand skills. So this skills information, you remember on the economy overview report, we looked at that for the large area that we selected. This is now just looking at the jobs for Stoke. So it's just looking at the hard skills advertised in the Stoke area in these job postings. Again, we can see some really similar skills in there to that broader area. So we've got communication, training, customer service, admin. So, thinking about that principle again of starting really broad and working your way really narrow. Those look like the skills, those transferable skills, which are needed in a very broad area, but then also in a very local area like Stoke. At the minute, we're looking at all jobs. I'm going to show you a more specific example in a minute. But straight away, I'd be looking at this and thinking, okay, are we, in terms of curriculum intent, are we building in these core skills, these hard skills and common skills we'll look at in a second? Are we building those into study programs, into apprenticeships and so on? Because these are the underlying skills that are needed within the economy right now. And clearly, these will change all the time, but that's where it's so important to look at how things have changed over time. And if you remember when we looked at the report the economy overview report, management is the highest skill, and it's been there for a long time. So clearly, that's a really in-demand skill. So looking at common skills, the difference between hard and common skills I'm going to show you on the next report. We are looking at this at a really headline level, so you tend to get a little bit of blurring between hard and common skills as we think about it in an educational setting, but you'll see the difference on the next report. But on here, we've got things like literacy, which often appears when you're looking at such a broad area. Again, really good to reinforce the importance of literacy, and numeracy often comes out in areas as well. It's not done on this occasion, but shows students the importance of studying those skills because they're really in-demand skills for employers. We've also got leadership on there, which really marries in nicely with management above. So this might be, don't just think about it in terms of leadership and leading people. It could be leading projects or, leading other activities. So, think about that more in the round. And project management appears quite regularly as well. So again, if students were, had a good aptitude for leadership and good project management skills, they'd, could manage, and they've got some good communication skills, and they're going to be really employable regardless of what industry they maybe want to work in. So what I'm going to do now is just filter this report to show you a very specific example. So I'm just going to look at web design and development professionals. So this is very specific. So we've gone from really headline view down to something, at a 4-digit SOC code level. And that's web development. So 307 jobs advertised in the last year for web development occupations. Slightly lower than average in terms of median posting duration. So suggests that those are probably a little bit easier to fill in the local economy. I'm just going to scrape down most of these. So just to show you the top companies posting again, you start to get more idea here of the actual specific employers rather than recruitment agencies. Although clearly there's some recruitment agencies on there as well, but Alex James Digital, don't know the area, but I would suggest that that's probably a local company, and maybe Iteco Limited. So, again, are you working with those companies? Are you having conversations about what their skills demand is worth considering. But just to get back down to the skills, so this is where, as I said, and the last section, where we can really see the difference between hard and common skills. So from those job postings, the 300 odd job postings for web developers, what we can see there is that CSS is the top programming language, closely followed by JavaScript, closely followed by PHP. And, really think this through. So the kind of rich data that we get in here at this level, often when I look at this data in colleges, there's a bit of a kind of a gasp of breath, because one, you can get down to such granular detail. This would take you lots and lots of conversations with lots and lots of employers to get to this level of understanding. But the general point here is, if you think about how we plan in colleges, web development may be 1 or 2 lines on a curriculum plan, and we know there's a demand for that because we know that digital is a growing economy. But without actually getting really under the skin of it, if I asked you now to think, okay, do you, in your web development programs, if you have any, do you deliver those top 3 or 4 programming languages? Not that I'm saying you necessarily should, but I would really push and think, well, if you're not, then you're maybe not setting young people up for the jobs that are out there in the direct local economy. There might be different programming languages with a different demand when we look at a more broader economy, but certainly in Stoke, those are the top programming languages. So it's really worth considering that. Looking at the common skills, then again, we've got leading, we've got creativity, as probably would be expected, creative problem solving. So these skills are often what underpin some of the more digital industries. So again, question I'm often asked in colleges is what skills should we be considering to underpin our digital curriculum? And obviously there is some technical stuff there, but I also always point people to these things like creativity, problem solving, leading, project management, because if you're, regardless of whether you need a technical qualification like a web developer program, if you had some of those other top common skills, you're going to be employable in other occupations within those digital industries. So whether that's working in sales or marketing or finance, you're still going to have some of those common skills that appear in the digital industries. So hopefully that's a useful report to see as well. So that is all I'm going to show you for today. Hopefully we've gone through a good range of information there. We've gone through an overview of a wide economy. We've gone into a little bit more detail in some of the highest ranked occupations in the area, and then looked at some specific job posting data for Stoke. It is just a taster to support the general PowerPoint slides that we did earlier on, and to think about how you're using some of this rich data in curriculum planning and to support curriculum intent. How are you talking to employers? How are you triangulating this with what you already know exists in your areas? Please contact me if you have any questions, if you'd like any more information, and hopefully look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.